David and his Empowerment Institute are renowned for decades of implementing transformational social change in multiple initiatives around the world. Now, what is the secret? What is the magic about something like that, that they continue, that they're scalable to the whole world? I met David back in the early 80s when he was just unfolding the first Earth Run. And what he learned from that got applied over the next 40 years. And so we couldn't resist asking David to come and tell us about what he does. So I just want to introduce him. In this charrette, David will present an overview of his Reinventing the Planet grand strategy and the 5 key levers that he's learned about in the work he's been doing. He will then take us into one lever. He'll take us to the climate in the Cool City Challenge, which is a compelling demonstration of the empowerment, how the Empowerment Institute delivers on its name and on its promise. So David, I'd like to turn it over to you. We'll be having a lively dialogue after this. If you have insights or questions, please put them in the chat, because we do refer to them and we do use them to keep learning. So even if you don't have a chance to talk about them on this call, we will have a record of them. So do not hesitate to use the chat. So David, we're thrilled that you're with us, and I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Good to be playing with you again, all these years later. And hello, everybody. A pleasure to be here. I know many of you. So fun to be in this space with you all. So just to reiterate, I want to start with the macro picture, a grand strategy. We call it modestly to reinvent the planet. And it's also a grand strategy to integrate and successfully, in my judgment, enable the SDGs. So it's got those aspirations. And then once you understand the methodology, the theory of change, if you will, that undergirds it, and we'll spend some time perhaps later on talking about theories of change that are able to actually have the impact that we need for the SDGs to be successful. Then I will really drive deeply into one of them and share with you the scaling strategy deploying this methodology. And then we'll have time to have a conversation about it. Okay, so I'm going to start with a video. And this is a reasonably short video, about 6-minute video, that lays out the grand strategy and the second order change framework that undergirds it and what I'll share in a little bit. So let me move into share screen. Okay, share sound, optimize. Okay, here we go.
Humanity is at a critical juncture in our evolution. Unless we rapidly change our trajectory as a species, our civilization will unravel. The question is, how do we change? There are many dedicated and heroic changemakers pouring their hearts and souls into trying to change the world, but they struggle to break through. What if the problem was not the world's unwillingness to change, but the approaches we use to bring about change? What if how we thought about social change and what people were capable of achieving was the problem? If we wish to change the world, we need to first change the way we think about change. The mindset for a new approach is best described in the provocative Apple ad, "Here's to the crazy ones." They see things differently, are not fond of rules, and have no respect for the status quo. While some may think them as crazy, the ones crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. These are 3 questions the crazy ones must ask if we want to change the world. How do we reinvent social change? How do we reinvent social activism? How do we reinvent the planet? From a social change point of view, the world is a composite of many social systems. The complexity and discord in the world today have placed multiple stresses on these systems, causing them to become unstable and break down. When a social system is not tethered to something that keeps it in place, it can not only break down, it can also break through and evolve to a higher level of performance and social value. In systems theory, this is called second-order change, and in this context, transformative social change. The alternative is first-order change or incremental social change. These two approaches to social change can be called social change 1.0 and social change 2.0. 1.0 consists of the traditional social change tools of passing laws, financial incentives, information campaigns, and social protest. Although necessary, it is insufficient in a world that requires fundamental transformation. So if we can achieve the transformative social change needed on our planet through forcing people to change, paying them to change, telling them to change, or demanding they change, what is left? Empowering people to want to change. What empowers people to change is a compelling vision of a better life and the tools to achieve it. And what empowers the crazy ones is the ability to design second-order change solutions that empower lots of people to change. This combination provides the agency necessary for social change 2.0 to flourish. Over the past 40 years, David Gershon, one of the world's leading experts in empowerment and social change, has created 5 second-order change solutions that address the mission-critical issues required for humanity's viability. Each is built around a lever capable of changing the game around that issue. He has also written the definitive book on second-order change, Social Change 2.0. This book empowers the crazy ones with the 5 social change superpowers needed to reinvent the planet. How to empower, transform, innovate, unify, and mobilize. What happens when we integrate these 5 second-order change solutions and 5 social change 2.0 superpowers is an alchemical reaction that changes the game of change. And what emerges is a holistic plan to reinvent the planet. 1. Climate Goal and Strategy, Cool Block Program. By 2030, empower cities around the world and their citizens with the agency and second-order change knowledge to transform the climate paralysis into carbon-neutral cities and breakthrough solutions. 2. Development Goal and Strategy, Imagine Program. By 2030, empower women in the developing world with the agency and second-order change knowledge to transform the cycle of poverty into thriving lives and communities. 3. Peace Goal and Strategy, Peace on Earth by 2030 Game. By 2030, empower a global bottom-up movement of peacemakers with the agency and second-order change knowledge to transform the paradigm of war into peace on Earth. 4. Knowledge Goal and Strategy, Empowerment Institute Center for Reinventing the Planet. By 2030, empower the world's changemakers with the agency and second-order change knowledge to transform the world's insoluble problems into breathtaking opportunities that reinvent the planet. 5. Money Goal and Strategy, Reinventing the Planet Fund. By 2030, empower the world's visionary philanthropists with the agency and second-order change knowledge to transform the trillions of dollars of social change investments into second-order change solutions that reinvent the planet. We find ourselves at a moment in time when the environmental and social stresses are so pronounced that they have become catalysts to accelerate human evolution. In evolutionary biology, this is called punctuated equilibrium, a time when rapid and quantum change suddenly becomes possible. In September 2015, the ambitious UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 were launched. The world is now searching for the means to implement the magnitude and speed of transformative social change these goals demand. This plan to reinvent the planet provides humanity with the means. But it goes beyond that. It allows us to realize our fullest potential as a human species, live in harmony with each other and the earth, and regain control of our destiny, enabling us to experience hope, passion, and excitement about the future. Please join us for the greatest adventure of our time, reinventing the planet.
Okay. Reinventing the planet, my friends, the great adventure of our time. So happy to have you all here on this great adventure. And so I want to now talk about one of the 5 levers the climate lever, and then we'll have time to unpack so many things and so much possibility. One of my favorite quotes is John Gardner just says, the world is full of insoluble problems, full of breathtaking opportunities disguised as insoluble problems. So let us focus on the breathtaking opportunities available when we have the kind of capability that second order change presents to us. So with that said, let me now share these slides on the Cool City Challenge and take you on a deep dive. Okay, so our aspiration is to create carbon neutral cities by 2030. We call it a climate moonshot scaling strategy. It's an initiative of our Empowerment Institute Center for Reinventing the Planet, which was highlighted in the video as the mechanism through which we are promoting and promulgating second order change. So this is a second order change strategy, meets climate change. So the climate challenge, actually right now we all know we have a problem, Houston, but the challenge is time. We have to get a lot of change done in a very short amount of time, or we hit a tipping point and hit irreversible ecological tipping point. So this is a time problem, not just a climate problem. We have to figure out how to speed up time. So where do we get the most carbon reduction in the shortest period of time? When we think about that, what we find very clearly starts to show up is that cities generate 70% of our footprint, and we have all the solutions we need for cities to become carbon neutral. So another lesser known fact is that we represent 70% of that footprint through our daily lifestyle choices. And if we can mobilize an entire community, which is the aspiration, then you could actually have direct impact rather rapidly, not waiting for everything to scale up through technological means or political means. So what solutions can create carbon neutral cities by 2030? So as one surveys the space of climate solutions, one finds that most of the world is focused on top-down. So policies, legislation, technology, and creating new markets, which enables new technologies to scale. And they are very important, and they have been successful, but they're not sufficient to achieve substantial carbon reduction, certainly not in this time frame. And then we move into the bottom-up climate solutions, a space that I spent a lot of my time in. They've also been successful, but they by themselves are not sufficient to achieve substantial carbon emissions. So a question that came to me literally in a dream, I won't tell you the whole dream, but some point in time, maybe I will tell some of you the dream. It's quite a fun dream that I had, which gave me this breakthrough. What if by combining top-down and bottom-up climate solutions, we could create carbon neutral cities by 2030? That's the query. Can we actually create a whole system solution? So enter the unitive narrative starts to meet, if you will, climate change. So that's the question. And what we find when we start to ask that question is that there is a way to drive the whole system, and it's through our individual behavioral change. The demand side drives the supply side. It can activate the whole system, which basically says we are not victims waiting for somehow some magical political solution or technological solution to save us. We have the power in our own hands, in our own homes, and how we drive, how we do things, if we can aggregate and scale that level of change, which is part of what I want to share how to do. So enter, whoops, now I got there, sorry. Enter the Cool Bot program, the journey that I've been on some 30 years now that has evolved into this program, which is how you empower citizens, you and me, to change our behavior and scale it. So we've been working for some 40 years around the behavioral change, social change universe. We've gained a lot of experience. We've worked with many millions of people in hundreds of cities around the world. The basic idea of empowerment is enabling people to envision and create what they want in their lives and their worlds. So it's always based on a compelling vision of the possible and the tools to enable it. So how does it work? Oops, a little ahead of myself here. A block leader, someone says yes on a block, could be any of you if you so were inclined. We teach you how to reach out to your neighbors and form a block-based team of 5 to 8 households. You meet 9 times over 4.5 months. You work through these 5 topics. You learn how to become more disaster resilient, how to better reduce your carbon footprint, how to conserve and better steward water, how to increase the livability, which is the quality of life, health, safety, beautification, greening, resource sharing on your block, and how to empower others. If I make impact, but others don't, we don't get very far. It's designed into 120 action recipes. You do this as a peer support group of your neighbors. So you have the peer motivation and the peer impetus and the peer pressure, if you will, to follow through on your good intentions. There are self-directed meeting guides that help you actually make the meetings happen successfully, enabling you to achieve these results. There's a volunteer coach who comes and supports the teams. We've built a mobile web platform, which it delivers the program, and then it integrates local resources associated with 120 action recipes. So we know the what, but the bigger question is, not bigger, but equally important question is, so why will people do this? And by the way, I'm hearing some sounds, and maybe people could mute in the background so we can have a better recording. If you would, that'd be great. So why do people join? What we found over the years is that there are 3 fundamental reasons. They're seeking greater meaning. They want to create a better world for their children. They're seeking to get to know their neighbors. They want more community, place-based community, not just community with, virtual communities. And they want agency. They want to make a difference. So those are the reasons why people have said yes. And in fact, if I start from the bottom, 45% of the people on a block, any block that we've done this, on average, through this neighbor-neighbor approach, are joining a team because they want those 3 things. On average, they're taking 25 distinct actions, which, by the way, researchers said are sustained over time. They're reducing their footprint by 31%, which is a significant number. On average, well, not on average, but that is on average, 5,000 plus participants have participated in this program. And this program, by the way, is built on our work with many prior programs. So ultimately, we've worked with many millions of people, but just 5,000 in this context, but it's built on that larger learning journey we've been on. 325 cool blocks have been created across these 7 California cities, which is where we've chosen to start this. So now we have to face the bigger question, a great potential with these tools, but can we move the needle fast enough for humanity to actually keep the planet? I mean, that's the big question humanity is facing right now, because this is a non-negotiable issue. So speed is essential. So part of our research over the last several decades is around the science of tipping points, where you can get significant leverage if you know how to work a tipping point. And we are working with 3 tipping points in this methodology. We call them diffusion of innovation, cyclogenesis, and punctuate equilibrium. And I'll unpack all 3 of those for you. Some of you may know the work of Everett Rogers, who wrote the book Diffusion of Innovation. His research, based on working with some 1,500 case studies over 50 years on how new ideas spread, has found that there are 4 stages in which an innovation spreads. First, there are the innovators, who are the ones seeking out the immediate idea. Some of you, for example, fit that category. They seek out the early adopters. These are the people who have a high tolerance for experimentation and who seek out the new They come to you. You don't have to come to them generally because they're always looking for you. There are a few of you on this call right now. And what his research said is that you get to about 15%, you hit a tipping point where the innovation, if it's capable of diffusing, starts diffusing on its own momentum, which means you don't have to work that hard. You just have to work smarter, finding early adopter communities, early adopter blocks, early adopter block leaders, and so on. And then it starts to move into the early majority, who are the belongers, who come along when they see it's proven, and then it moves into the late majority if it continues to have momentum, and these are the people who will eventually come along because they have no alternative, there's social pressure, and the laggards you'll never get. So that's the diffusion of innovation, and everything we're building with our Cool City Challenge is based on that. The second science of tipping point work that we have done is around the notion of cyclogenesis, which is the study of how hurricanes form. And it comes out of the natural world, observation of the natural world. And what has been learned is that hurricanes don't come fully formed. They come as small vortices who at some point start combining. So that red person is the block leader reaching out to his or her neighbors and getting these teams established on blocks. And then they reach out to more neighbors until you find yourself with an immensely large, powerful vortex. And now you have these tipping points tipping in every which way in a community. We've seen that happen in a number of our initiatives. The first Earth Run was an example of that until it went fully to scale. The third tipping point strategy that we're deploying, which is really not so much that we're deploying, but we are recognizing and leveraging, is known as punctuated equilibrium, which is the study of evolutionary biology. 850 million years ago, there was a moment when we had single-cell organisms that were about to go extinct, our ancestors, because there was too much oxygen in the atmosphere. And they had to combine into multicellular organisms to process the oxygen. There was an extinction level threat, which demanded the next level of an evolutionary process. So the way it works is when a stable system finds itself in an extinction level threat, it enables rapid change to a new state. And essentially what starts to happen is that demands in the system greater levels of intelligence, creativity, and will. Cool City Challenge is built around activating and fully enabling that level of intelligence, creativity, and will. So with that, it's our belief we can speed up change and increase the magnitude and 3x our current trajectory. That is the aspiration of the Cool City Challenge. Can we do it? Well, it's extinction level threat, or we do it. We have some experiences. We believe we can do it. And that is the journey that we are on. So how does it really work such that you begin to scale this level of impact? So let me walk you through one component of our scaling process, starting with Cool Blocks. And what you'll start to see is this thing we call the climate action capacity. We're building the capacity of an individual, of a neighborhood, of a city, ultimately of a planet. But it starts with the individual on the block who says yes. And you'll see this meter moving to the right, because at each level of scale, we invite the person to go to the next level, the neighborhood level. So how do you move to the cool neighborhood where you now can impact at the scale of 10 cool blocks and do things you couldn't do at the scale of an individual block? So think multicellular organisms continuing to move into organs and so on as you start to use this evolutionary biology metaphor. And then the cool district, 10 cool neighborhoods, each of them built from the individual on up. So the strong cellular foundation. And then you move to a cool city, which is 400 cool blocks, which creates the vanguard, the tip of the spear that enables, imagine 10,000 people coming into City Hall and saying, we want a different kind of city. You know, you start to have that capability when you have that number of cool blocks. Not to mention all the tipping points that are happening along the way. And then you move into a cool region. Think of this as multiple counties, or in some cases, you know, the equivalent of a certain section of a state or a country, and then a cool state, ultimately a cool country. You see the process. It all starts from the bottom. So let me now apply this model around the biggest issue, getting much more granular, which is transportation, which in most cities is at least 60 to 70% of the footprint. Transportation is the most challenging because we got to get people to make all kinds of changes in transportation practices. You can't just get green energy and hope that that takes care of everything else, because it doesn't, but it is an important piece. So let me show how it works. So when people go through cool block, they walk more, they bike more, they share rides, they switch to EVs, they use public transit. That in turn starts to create demand for the policy and the technology and market solutions. So new charging stations, new dollars invested in EVs, new kinds of transit options, sidewalks, and so on. Car-free zones, bike lanes, the stuff that many of you are likely doing in your communities if you are in the climate space or just environmental space. These top-down investments drive more behavioral change, and now you've got cities saying, yes, this makes sense. We'll put in the monies, we'll do the bonds, we'll do what everything else we need to do. We've got the demand from our citizenry, and we've got people actually willing to utilize these things, which starts to create less car trips, so now less parking, more space for parks, housing, public spaces, affordable housing now gets easier if you're living in California or other places, higher density, greater health. And then you start to see a phenomenon, which is where one system tips the other systems. So transit starts to tip energy and resilience and buildings and health and resource stewardship. Once we've connected the dots and we've shown the methodology, so much is possible that no one could even have imagined right now because of our current way of thinking about change and how we go about it, if you will, first order change. So how does this translate into a carbon neutral city? So the basic idea is that cool blocks, the foundation, evolve into cool neighborhoods. Cool neighborhoods evolve into carbon neutral neighborhoods. Carbon neutral neighborhoods start to scale into a carbon neutral city. And ultimately, this cool city becomes the new MO of how cities organize themselves in the future. And hopefully that future is within our immediate grasp. This also generates what we call process transformation. So there's new trust in the system. There's community cohesion. There's second order change leadership capacity. This is fantastically important for getting the kinds of larger transformations the full spectrum of the SDGs require. So continuing along, we are also, through our empowerment work, generating what we call moonshot beliefs. You need moonshot beliefs to get this kind of magnitude and speed of change. So what are those moonshot beliefs? The first is audacity. Of course we can do this. Why can't we get a carbon neutral city by 2030? There's no inherent reason we can't. So we need to have the audacity to dream and operate at that level. Abundance. Let's do this. Let's not do this on a nickel or a dime. Let's raise the resource. Let's get the people. Let's get everything we need. Let's get the intelligence. There's an abundance of everything if we know how to tap into it. Agency, which is, of course, is the belief that I am, I can, we are, we can. And we're building agency literally block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city. And alchemy is where the synergy of all of this comes together and you start to get the synergy effect. So we've chosen California to start our journey. For these reasons, they have this immense recognition of the extinction level threat is facing them every day with all the climate effects. There's a deeply rooted environmental ethos. There's tremendous political will. A lot of cities have made the commitment to carbon neutrality. We've helped facilitate some of that. There's money, there's know-how, and there's ambitious carbon neutrality goals. So the scaling mechanism for creating carbon neutral cities by 2030 across California and the world, we call it the Cool City Challenge Moonshot Climate Action Plan, or MCAP for short. And while it is a 30-page document, I'll give you the one-slide version of it, and I've already alluded to that. The strategies and tools and methodology of this MCAP roadmap boils down to cool blocks, evolving into cool neighborhoods, evolving into carbon neutral neighborhoods, which represent 70% of city carbon footprint.
Yay! Hello, children. Did you have a good one?
We're getting some cheering for the MCAP, but maybe not just for that. But if anyone could just mute, that would be good, so we can continue the presentation. Please put yourself on mute.
Eve, please mute.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you. And then cool blocks and cool neighborhoods create the economic driver, plus the social pressure for carbon neutral businesses, which equals 30% of a city's carbon footprint. We've partnered with the state of California. Gavin Newsom is a fan of ours. He's been a fan of the bottom-up approach for some time. And this was his affirmation. Cool Block is an exemplary how-to guide for local communities to make significant impact on climate change. We're working in a number of other places as well, but this is the California part of our journey. So here's where we are. Last year, we piloted it with 3 cities, this what we call the Moonshot Climate Action Plan Scaling Systems. We put some funding together and identified 3 cities to pilot this. It was a successful pilot. We did about 200 cool blocks and really learned a lot about getting these scaling systems primed. This year, we'll be identifying 3 cities to partner with to implement the Moonshot Climate Action Plan. We're in conversations with a number of those cities right now. We'll be selecting those cities, and we'll also be bringing funding to the table as well as our knowledge and our networks. And then the long-term game plan is to partner with up to 100 cities to implement the Moonshot Climate Action Plan and raise the funding required for that, which is a substantial amount of funding. And we're in the process of putting that financing together right now. So when you bring all these things together, you start to recognize there is an immense capability in the second order chain methodology and framework to get something substantial to happen, and is already happening. And then this is the ultimate, timeline we're working with. So carbon neutral California cities by 2030, carbon neutral American planet cities by 2030. We want to speed up California's timeline to carbon neutrality by 2035, and we want to speed up the United Nations goals to carbon neutral planet by 2040, because we represent so much of the planet's footprint. We can really make that happen. So let me just come back to the SDGs, since that was one of the organizing principles. These are the SDGs that we are directly impacting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of them through these 5 different areas. That's how we get there. So let me end with this quote. Again and again in history, some people wake up. They have no ground in the crowd, and they move to broader, deeper laws. In the Apple ad would call them the crazy ones. The basic idea is that Rilke is saying it's up to us, and it is up to us. And so we are the ones. We'll leave it at that for now. Okay. But that was essentially the end of the presentation. There wasn't more that I was wishing to offer. So let's see what questions you might have or feedback you wish to ask. I think there was a question about, I was just coming in when there was a question about the US versus beyond the US. Yeah, we're taking this all over the world. We started in California because we had the best opportunity there, but we're in conversations with 4 or 5 European cities right now And we're always very open to hearing more cities that would be responsive. We're also in conversations with cities all across the US. Ultimately, these 100 cities are going to be all around the world. The goal is to go where there is the most need and the most early adopter capability. So if any of you are connected with any cities, just reach out to us and we'll start a conversation. It's a long journey. There's a lot of work to do to actually get primed to even be considered. But, you know, if you have the predisposition, we're all over it. We're looking for the cities to show what's possible. We have a great conversation going on now with Copenhagen, for example. So they committed to carbon neutrality by 2025. Some of you may or may not know that, but they couldn't get there. They had to regroup because they only could do top down. And so therefore their capabilities they're like a perfect case study for us of what you can or can't do with just the top down strategies of policy. Anyway, comments or questions?
And David, I'm suggesting that folks use the reaction button to raise their hands to
Okay.
more readily see them. So I'll ask you questions just since somebody else is asking one, David. So I mean, a lot of this is it's fantastic what you're talking about, and it's, you know, really brilliantly conceived. I guess my question is, there's a bit of kind of, it seems like an emergent or organic process of dissemination of what you're doing, you know, sort of by people who are connected to other people that are connected to other people and so on. I guess my question is, do you have a macro strategy of dissemination beyond that kind of approach? You know, yeah.
In other words, some entity that will somehow get the word out on behalf of all cities, or is that what you mean?
Yeah, and so, for example, interfacing with the UN around this, and sort of, you know, using the, you know, since this is an SDG group, you know, we're very UN aware here. It's not to say that everything has to be done through the UN. It's just, but it is, you know, UN is a vehicle.
So we've already been recognized as a best practice by the UN. So that's one place where we are already connected with the UN. Here's what I've seen, having done a lot of work with the UN. Generally, when you're working with cities, working at this level, the UN provides an imprimatur, but they're not usually a direct way to get to cities. Our mechanism is really more identifying the early adopters or them finding us. It's a combination, really. But we're always looking for distribution strategies. I mean, there's several different dynamics that will enable this to work. One is we have to raise a lot of money because cities don't have money and it costs money to do this. So we're in the process of putting a large fund together. Beyond that, it takes time to build out this kind of, you know, careful strategy. And so we're looking for the early adopters. That's why we're so intrigued by Copenhagen, because they've been at it for so long and they actually have enough pain points from seeing what can't happen. I mean, most cities create a plan to create carbon neutrality by 2030, not to mention these national levels or state levels, and they sit on the shelves. They don't have a clue. 1.0 is just not going to get, 1.0 is a incremental approach. This requires transformative change, and that's second order change, and they're not set up for that. So we're looking to find the right partners who have the mentality, who have the right ingredients, who have the right citizenry to prove that we can do this kind of a moonshot, and where no one has even seen it possible, where most people don't even have a clue on how we're going to get from here to there. So while it might be nice to get the word out so people have more understanding of this, we haven't really spent a lot of our time there, but we're always open, you know, and maybe this UN SDG community might be a way to get the word out. Because I mean, I think this would be, at the very least, Daniel, an accelerator for how to think about the process of building a carbon neutral systems within cities. So I'm all over getting any kind of support or ideas or whatever for that kind of new collaboration at that scale. And I've worked with the UN before, and I worked with UNEP before, so I do know those systems.
Looks like Rick Clugston has a question.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. I mean, the first one is sort of what size staff do you need to actually be able to do this? And then the second one really is focused more on, participating in the COPs, the climate COPs and other venues where, where a lot of people are looking for some kind of solutions. I think that's kind of builds on Daniel's question a little bit. But the first one is how big of a staff do you need? How is that structured? I know there's somebody on the call that also works with you, but
yeah, I mean, the basics of the staffing is actually, because we want to make this scalable, we figured out how to do this at the least amount of staff required, because it's really primarily volunteer cool block leaders and cool neighborhood leaders. So 3 staff get this thing rolling. We call them a program manager, and then 2 people to support that process. They do the recruiting, the training, and the coaching of cool block leaders and the supporting of the cool neighborhoods. If you have the funding, it's probably somewhere around $120,000 worth of staff requirements in terms of funding that we find or have found. Some places you can do it a lot with volunteers also, because there's a lot of people ready to do it. So it isn't 100% a function of the funding. We have built certain mechanisms for how to get this thing off the ground for about that much money a year, plus building out some capacity for these carbon neutral cities. So the costs we've maintained at a relatively modest level for what we're trying to do. We're also trying to transform the whole climate financing space, because the climate financing space has not really been directed into transformative change by primarily building infrastructure. And so we want to connect the top-down financing also. So we're in conversations with people in that space as well.
Sure. Thank you.
David, let me ask you another question, because nobody else is raising hands, so I'll kind of go ahead and do this one.
Sure.
India and China are like 2 of the major areas where, from what I read, India in particular, like, whether or not we're going to be able to, how far we're going to be able to keep to the 1.5 degree increase in Fahrenheit increase in temperature worldwide is going to largely depend on India and China as to whether or not they go along with this kind of thinking. So when you talk about early adopters, I was just in India a month or 2 ago, and it just seems to me that there are early adopters at the community level, then they're early adopters at an institutional level and a government level. And when I look at the government levels, I don't see early adopters in those 2 countries. Maybe at the citizenry level, maybe there are some like that, but the governance level does not seem to, for reasons that are a lot of self-justification, a lot of denial, and other kinds of things going on are resisting that. So I guess my question to you is and I think the extinction threat, even though it's very real to many people, it's not being recognized. So can you address kind of how your change strategy of early adopters interfaces with that reality?
So when we were organizing the first Earth Run way back when, that Heidi alluded to, we ended up with 62 countries, 45 heads of state. We didn't start with them. We started with the grassroots. They saw the power of this and they wanted to get in front of the parade. That's usually how political leadership works. And eventually we had all these presidents, including China and Russia and America. Now this was an event, not the same as a strategy like this, but it was a teaching for me around the process of diffusion of an innovation from the early adopters. So China and India are not early adopters around this kind of change. China is trying its best with top-down institutional change, and it will get as far as it can get. Now, here's an interesting aside. I was invited by some top Chinese leadership about 7 or 8 years ago. They didn't quite know how disruptive this was to their worldview. So I think they didn't quite know what they were doing inviting me, but nonetheless, I got invited and I spoke at a conference of mayors, and they loved this. They loved it because they were engaging the citizenry and they didn't know how to do that. So I would say when things tip, they tip. And I think the potential for this to tip will occur that way. How it works in India is a different story. India is a much more messy, complex system. I'm doing a lot of work in India. I'm working all across India right now with our Imagine program. So I do know India, and I have some interesting connections there. I wouldn't start with India, but I think India can come along at the right moment, as it is coming along at the right moment now, vis-a-vis the COPs. So those are my thoughts on that. Heidi.
You're muted.
Yeah. Wow, I have so many comments. The question of the number of staff and how to get people to know about this that need it, that Rick, that you asked, and Wendy's comment about how do we have to wait for California? I just want to say one of the things that inspires me about this was in the little video we were shown up front, that it recognizes that's what's missing is not the desire for these things or the profound need to have something change. It's that people don't know how to do that. And one of the things that inspires me about your work, David, is that you just answered about your staff in cool cities. I happen to know that that staff is also handling the other explosions that are going on, not just cool cities. So I just want to say that when something is emergent, it doesn't need a linear progression, either in the results you're looking for or in how you get it started. But what I see in what you shared with us is a really deep understanding, and of decades of observation, clearly, that by getting something to be an idea whose time has come, that once that happens in a community, a little community, and that begins to expand out, that is what a moonshot stands for, is having an idea whose time has come, which then explodes exponentially if it's really on course. So you aren't looking for the same, how many people know about it now? That's why early adopters are so important, because once it becomes that, it shifts. What we learned in the Hunger Project that Lynn Twist was part of back in 1977, I think, which is maybe even where I met you, David, I'm not sure, but is that once that the way to have something become an idea whose time has come is when something that's considered content becomes context. So it's not just, well, it would be nice if we handled carbon, got to carbon neutral communities. It's something that becomes the reason for being. And it addresses, the most important thing that does is it addresses people's understanding about how to make something like this happen. There's so many examples of that in the set you just showed us and the story you just told us that I just want to point out. We're talking about an emergent process, not a linear one. And that that if somebody like Wendy doesn't have to wait for California, because you've already bottom-upped and have actual aids to anybody who wants to get started, any early adopter, and it can get started because you've left the cookie crumbs behind to show how to get there. Tons of them.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and so that brings me to the question that Rick pointed to, which is really important for this group. Really, it's a major concern of the SDGs Synergy Circle, I think, is how do we find the people in the UN projects around the SDGs who are those who want to pair up with people who are actually seeing stuff like that happen. That's the question, is once we have enough of these stories, and especially with the amazing assists you've created for people who want to get started in their community, how do we bring that to the people that need it and don't yet know that that's available? And to me, that's what's so exciting about the SDG Synergy Circle, is that that's where we're aiming. I see Joni nodding her head. I know Joni's been a major assist in this. So that's kind of where we want to go with this.
So let me just make a few comments. Thank you for that, Heidi. You know, one of the things that we had a conversation about in preparing for this with this group was the notion of the theory of change and the need for more sophistication around the notion of how change itself works. People don't understand theory of change, and they're using strategies that really have no proven track record for getting impact. And they haven't asked those deeper questions, then we need to go back to the basics. And so one of the conversations I teed up with you all, the SDG Synergy Circle, was how to increase the social change IQ of those who are working in the SDG community. Because without that, there's all kinds of ideas that are thrown out there, but when they're actually evaluated, you see all the things that are constraining them from actually getting impact. So that's why I started with the video. And what we've built with this Reinventing the Planet Grand Strategy is a coherent, comprehensive approach to the SDGs. It includes and transcends just, let's say, a unit of narrative or just trying to integrate them all. It's an actually implementation capability. So my aspiration would be, how do we start having that conversation using Cool City Challenge or the other initiatives we have as examples? But anyway, let me move on. So I think I saw maybe Victoria next.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, David. I, of course, have heard of your work, and so this was very exciting to, excuse me, see it so well laid out. I just want to make a couple of comments first about your presentation, because I thought that the artwork on it was really wonderful. It had like a childlike quality, but yet it was very sophisticated and very clear to see. So that was wonderful. Also, just a funny thing, when you had that interruption where it sounded like there was some children coming in a room somewhere, I actually thought it was children. You had just said we've been successful, and I thought I heard children all saying, yay, yay.
There was 2 interruptions, and those are 2 of them. So, you know, universe is a major part of this. So yay, they're doing it.
Yeah.
Interruption on the downside on the energy. I think that was just a case study. We got to get our act together rather quickly, or we don't keep our power. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that was interesting. Also, your last statement when your power went out, you had read the beginning of Rilke, and then I thought we were meant to read the rest of it in silence. So that was very powerful too.
Well, I'm going to have to find myself that. Maybe I'll do that in the future formally.
So what I wanted, my question to you is, having worked with small groups, people working together and eventually doing something creative, waking up together really. And so when these leaders in the neighborhoods come together with their, their people that are working with their participants, what do you see unfolding in those groups? Because, humanity, we have a hard time working together. And, there's been a lot of like committees and people coming together and deciding to do a project, and then a lot can happen, as we all know. So I just wonder what you've heard from how those groups really maintain this vision, and also, how much work has to be done and really stay with it.
I would say the thing that continues to inspire me and encourage me is what we hear from these groups. People fall in love with their neighbors. They fall in love with their agency. They fall in love with their block. They fall in love with the ability to actually have impact. We meet these unmet needs that people have. I think you may know or heard of the book called Bowling Alone, where this is the demise of social capital, and we are regenerating social capital, literally block by block, sometimes even within a home, because we get a whole family game to engage together. So it's the secret sauce of our success, is that we connect neighbors, and they have been disconnected and haven't known how to connect. When they connect, they learn how to collaborate and cooperate. They don't know it, but they're in a second order change training, because the results that they're getting are because they are applying some of the knowledge we've gained about transformative social change applied to a very practical problem, which is their footprint or disaster resiliency or the livability on their block. So I would say if we were counting on climate concerns or climate consciousness to get us there, I would say it's a much harder lift. But if we're counting on people wanting to get to know their neighbors and wanting to do something to make their block better, remember the idea of empowerment is a compelling vision and the tools to enable it. So the compelling vision is not saving the planet. For some it is, but for many they're not there. And we don't need to take them there or get them there. We just need to say, do you want a better block? Do you want to live a higher quality life? Would you like to get to know your neighbors? Would you like to do the things you've always wanted to do but haven't known how to do? And they do it. And they love it. And now our job is to take it to the next level, just really scale it. And that's the growing edge we're working on. So
Thank you. Beautiful.
you're welcome. Wendy, question.
Yes, David, I'm super passionate about community engagement. But what I wanted to say was, from the emergent space, I think we've got solutions, innovative solutions that none of us have thought about. And an example of that is I've just gone into dialogues, and I'm going in as an advisor to a highly innovative app that wants to transform the volunteering space. And I was sitting here thinking, well, that it would actually be a perfect fit, because they're looking at how you engage communities and radically transform about how people engage with sustainability. And I'd be very interested to talk to you when that's kind of under wraps and is coming out of development. But I think what we've got is the universe, as ever, creating extraordinary possibilities and synergies to assist the process. And I think technology is one of them. So yes, it was I'm very interested in what you're doing, and particularly interested in how we scale to achieve these things, and with that sense of urgency. So yeah, lovely work, and I'd love to kind of do what I can to support it.
Thank you, Wendy. And if you want, happily have a conversation. Carlin Young, who's on this call, is our CTO, and he is building a lot of different kinds of technologies for our scaling, and happy to see if there's any synergies, A, and B, also just happy to help them think about the notion of second order change. Because when you build a technology or other kind of social change intervention, and you don't have that in the back of your mind, you often find yourself falling short of your goals because you don't have a theory of change. How will people participate in this? Or how well thought out is your theory of change? So I want to keep going back to the basics, because if you get the basics right, the rest can take care of themselves. But if you don't get the basics right, you spend a lot of time and resources. And you also, the thing I'm always wanting to protect is people's belief in the future and belief in humanity. And when you try things that don't get traction, often people find those beliefs challenged, because they say, well, humanity can't do it or won't do it. But often it's us who aren't really skillful enough to know how to do what it is we want to do. So again, happy to be a resource, but I would say that across the board to anybody working on any projects, or if you're funding projects or participating in projects, those are the foundational questions. And if you're asking the right questions on the front end, then you get very different results on the back end. No guarantee you'll get good results on the back end, but a better chance that you can. So, Sue.
Okay. Hi, David. Can you give us your elevator pitch on your theory of change?
Yes, well, I already did a version of it through the video. So I'm
Yeah, but I think it's hard for people who are just coming across it.
So here's the elevator pitch. The world is a function of many social systems: healthcare, education, financial, political, among others. Those social systems are deeply stressed right now and breaking down. The SDGs is an answer to how to get some changes happen. It's not an answer to actually how to get the change. So when those systems break down, we see all kinds of problems. What happens when they break down is that they start to become unstable. They start to become marginally functional or dysfunctional, but they also become unmoored from that which keeps them in place. So there's nothing holding them in place. And so many things, like for example, in America, in our political system, it's dysfunctional. It can't get change to happen. It can't produce the results we expect upon it. But when it is unstable like that and broken down, you can create breakthrough to a higher level of performance and social value, which is second order change. And then you compare and contrast first order change, which is legislation, financial incentives, disincentives, social protest, and awareness. And you try to get those first order change solutions to produce a second order change result. First order change solutions are incremental. Second order change is transformational. There's a disconnect and people can't get the result and they get very dispirited or apathetic at that point. But if you are able to empower people with a compelling vision and the means to enable it, what looks like an insoluble problem becomes soluble. So the theory of change really is how to move forward second order change solutions to second order change problems. The first order change solutions that can be solved with legislation, they should do it, and they are doing it. But if you can't, then you have to up the game. And that's the theory of change that I'm working with. And most of the solutions I'm working with are around the toughest problems, like climate change. So that's a short answer, reasonably short answer. Okay, so any other questions? I think we have about 5 more minutes as I see it. If there are any other questions or comments. We may have run the course here. It looks like Daniel has a
Let me just take Sue's question, the elevator pitch question. I tracked everything you said in the answer to the question, except I couldn't get at the second order change what the fundamental methodologies are. And it sounds to me like the fundamental methodologies, and this goes back to the name of your organization, is about empowerment at the grassroots level. And counting on that to be able to then generate sort of, traction and dissemination and diffusion. I don't know if that's true. I'd like to hear.
I mean, in the video, but thank you for asking that question, Daniel. What I often say is, if you want to understand how to do second order change, read Social Change 2.0, because it's really the how of that. But if you were to boil it down based on the video, it has 5 core competencies. The first is empowerment, but that's not the whole story. The second is you have to know how to transform a system, be it a household, a block, a neighborhood, a city. So you have to understand the mechanisms of transformation itself. The third is you have to know how to build transformative social innovations, those innovations that are capable of creating this kind of transformation. You can't just do it through a one-off thing. You actually have, like the cool block is a social innovation, transformative social innovation. The cool city is a transformative social innovation. The Moonshot Climate Action Plan is a transformative social innovation. These are all robust. And as you unpack them, you start to see how and why they're transformational, and why and how they're empowering, and how and why they are, innovative, if you will. And the fourth one is, the fourth element of second order change is around the notion of you have to unify a system. You have to get a unitive experience. You've got to bring the neighbors together, the households together, the partner organizations of a community together. So it's always about creating the whole system, the top and the bottom together. So the organizing principle always in second order change is there any part of the system that's not included? Because if it's not, then that's going to become a limiting factor. So it's either vertical or horizontal unification of the different elements of the system. So how to do that is the fourth element. And the fifth is how you diffuse, how you take a innovation and you diffuse it, which is some of the stuff I was sharing with the diffusion of innovation, but more than that. So again, it's a long book, it's a big book, but it's the how of it. There's a lot of detail. It's very granular. There's a lot of case studies. It's a whole formal intervention in the whole space of social change. And it's saying we can do better and we have to do better. And each of the 5 levers has a robust second order change strategy associated with it. But what you saw with the Cool City Challenge really embedded all those 5 elements.
Thanks, David.
And Anne-Marie. Hi, Anne-Marie. We had so much fun in the Netherlands when we were doing our work there in the 90s with our eco team. So it's always fun to see someone from the Netherlands.
Well, that's good, and hope to see you back soon then. And otherwise, we'll meet in Copenhagen, of course, with Bente. But thank you for the work and what you're sharing. And I guess in your elevator pitch, I mean, your elevator pitch, of course, is very much for social architects, I would say. And I can imagine that you also have great social elevator pitches for people that are perhaps not so much into these different types of order change. So I would be interested at a certain point, but I can imagine, I thought that was already a lot in the movie. I like that. I really like the movie. I would like to revisit it again, and I can imagine that we can see more about that. But what I just wanted to share, I just came out, and that's why I was a bit late, out of the meeting of Living Cities Earth that we have set up in June, with bringing together Integral City Networks, Living City Network in Russia, some other groups. And our ambition is to reach out in a few years, 10,000 cities. And at this phase, with the 35 founders we're looking at that are all in networks of networks and working with cities, etc., we're looking at how on earth are we going to create a theory of change with all our diverse ways of working? And we know there's something underlying that. And I would like to invite you to see if we could have a conversation around that, because I could imagine that would really be very impactful if we bring that together with what you have already experienced over these so many years. And then I see that I would also very much like to see how we can much more even bring it here into the SDG thought leaders as a way. But yeah, so I just wanted to put that here and see whenever the time is right. And I think one of the big issues that we are all seeing that we are doing is that we're following the energy. And I think that's a great way of doing it, because that makes, well, anyway, it makes my heart sing. So thank you.
David, I think we're just about out of time.
I'm just going to make one quick comment to Anne-Marie, and then,
sure.
We can run out, we'll complete. By the way, if there's anyone who would like to stay on, Daniel, if there's the wherewithal, I'm happy to stick around longer.
Yep.
Sometimes these things have a life of their own, if you will, following the energy. So what I will say is I would be happy to do that. The notion of the book Social Change 2.0 is what we call a pattern language for second order change. So it's designed to apply to any situation. Mm-hmm. And people form social change 2.0 study circles, and then they apply their projects to it. So it was written for exactly the purposes that you are wanting to utilize it, and working at the local level to me is where we're going to change the world. So anyway, anyone who wants to stick around afterwards, I'm happy to have more time for questions. Daniel, back to you.
I think actually, where are we? 126. Sue, if you've got a very quick question you want to ask and a quick response, then we'll turn it over to Kurt to kind of close this out. But yeah.
So you're muted.
You're muted.
I'm muted. Am I through now? Oh gosh, I was clicking on it and it wouldn't go. Having read the book, it seems to me that I think of the theory of change slightly differently. It seems that you see human beings as fundamentally social and cooperative, not competitive, although competitive might play a part, that they want to feel part of something, they want a sense of belonging, and they want to give rather than just receive. And you're building on that view of what human beings are actually fundamentally like for this to work? That's
I
my
would say,
understanding.
yes, I would say yes to all of that. We appeal to the parts of humanity that want a better quality of life. And when they start to see what enables that, I have a fundamental belief that human beings are that way, but we also appeal to the elements of their humanity that give them more than they currently have. So they are aspiring, and so should we say, a different worldview than just consumption filling the needs. It's each other filling each other's needs. And when you get those elements together, a lot can happen. So short answer, could be a lot longer, but that's my short version. So Daniel, I think we
Yep.
are.
Kurt, it's over to you.
Yeah, all right. So first of all, thank you to David. This is absolutely, of course, germane to the type of synergy that we're trying to create in this circle, which was reprised by Heidi and also by Joni in their opening statements, and also that you're willing to stay on for some more questions. One thing I want to note is that in the chat, I've given the links for both the Synergy Circle's newsletter, because that's where all the permanent links are for you to find out not only about the Holo Movement book, the Holo Movement event, but upcoming event from the other Synergy Circles that are germane to this topic. So for instance, you'll see there that the Eco-Spirituality Synergy Circle, of which Rick Clugston here is a founder, they're going to be reconvening the Rome Assisi Conference on Spirituality and Sustainability in June. And the way for you to be invited to that, of course, is through those connections that are there in the Synergy Circle's newsletter. That was a program for many years before COVID, in association with many others, including the Vatican Dicastery for Laudato Si. So you're going to want to give some attention to that. Also, you're going to see links in there about a video series that two other Synergy Circles, Integral and Holistic Cosmologies, of which Jude is a co-founder, and Cornerstones, which is being moderated by Rihanna Eisler, on the foundational questions of our time. And it's actually a forum for all of these communities and their leaders to put into a permanent, really nice format, this really nailing down of what the real pivotal points now that need to be addressed, at a global level. So that's where to find all those links. All the videos will always be at YouTube at the Sacred Stories channel. So if you're ever wondering what's going on with videos coming out from the ELs as well, among the Synergy Circles, you can always go to YouTube, the Sacred Stories channel, and they'll all be there under Light on Light. So that's the last of those announcements. Now, usually what we do, and I'm going to revert back to Daniel and ask him, is we give a chance for each of the core members or the founders of this circle, of which there are 6 here, just to give some final comments. I'm going to ask Daniel if we have time for that. And if we do, I will call the roll.
I think for a very brief comments, I think we're already losing some folks. So, but if there's kind of a 1-sentence comment that anybody has, I'd say let's go for it. And,
All right, so let's
I'll
just start.
exempt myself.
I know that people may have scheduled conflicts here because we're past the half hour. So let's start with Jude Curavan.
Thanks, David. That was magnificent, as always. So thank you. You mentioned worldview a few times, and you also mentioned unit of experience. I know we don't have time to go into it now, but I would like to see if we might continue a conversation of how Change 2.0 can also empower people to expand their perception of their worldview. And of course, we were the circle that came up with the unit of narrative, and certainly it is an underpinning, it's a framing, but its potential is to underpin and frame such transformational change if it's worked in a touch point that is contextual, and if it's way that it resonates optimally with people. So I'd just like an opportunity to have that conversation at another time, I think, because it's an important ongoing perspective.
Yeah, so Jude, so thanks so much. And next would be, again, Dr. Richard Clugston, who I just mentioned with regard to the upcoming Rome Assisi conference. Rick?
Well, that was a great presentation. My brief comment, what sort of emerged to me is just what a great initiator you are, David, and that a lot of this transformation hinges on having enough initiators that then can relate to the early adopters, and that's identifying those initiators, helping us work together and to make change 2.0 is really an important task in the near future. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, Rick, and we'll move on to Dr. Joni Cartley.
That was awesome, David. Thank you so much. I was especially happy to see the word alchemy in there. I have a book called The Alchemy of Power, so I certainly relate to that. And I love the audacity, the idea of audacity. In my book, I call it bodacious. There's a difference between audacity and bodaciousness, but I think that's a really important distinction as well. And I'm really glad to see you get into the intangibles and getting some substantive work in that area.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, Joni. So on to Gordon Devron. I think you're on mute, Gordon.
David, as always, just tremendously brilliant and hopeful. And I would say, that you're touching what is really the inflection point on this planet. And that is the point between despair and hope. And authentic hope is based on a glimpse, a perception of real possibility. And that's what you offer. I mean, this your approach, which is the empowerment approach, is something that I think ignites hope. It ignites action. Anyway, it's very welcome to receive that, David, and thank you very much.
Right, so thanks, Gordon, and then on to Heidi.
Yeah, thank you, David. You know how I feel about your work, and I look forward to talking to you soon. I think hope, brilliance, Gordy, absolutely, because it's real. There's something so exciting about the fact that it's actually on the ground running around. And Jude, I loved your connection of the two, that it's my experience working with people on 2.0 change, that they become unitive. If they aren't already, they become it in the process of being able to address their possibility, because that makes them one with everyone they work with. And that's one of the things I love the most about the examples David gives, and why reading his book is so good. It gives so many different examples of that. So thank you so much.